Hi, I'm Jay Miller with RedBarn Catering. Welcome to our tutorial on working with short crust. Today specifically we are going to be making some little tartlet cups. The recipe that we will be working with is actually the same recipe that you could use to make one 9-inch bottom crust for a pie, so you can use the same recipe for that. But we will be specifically making pre-baked, blind-baked tartlet cups today. So, welcome to my first self-recorded, self-edited, forgive me if anything seems choppy or off as we go, but when we're done here we'll have some great little tartlet cups that we'll be able to have some fun with. So, for starters, why don't I just show you some of the equipment that we're going to be working with. So we've got obviously our rolling pin. These are the tartlet cups that we will be cutting out our circles and pressing into here. These are about 2.5, 2 3/4 diameter across. So we will be using a 4-inch circle cutter to make our shapes. You can really use anything for these if you've got some other fancy or fun shapes that you want to use. I have actually used one of these 48 count mini cupcake pans before. That works pretty well, but anything that you want to use will work fine. It's not completely necessary, but a bench scraper is very handy for keeping your workspace clean. Some flour for dusting as we go, and we've got some just some pinto beans that I use for blind baking. These are only for blind baking. I don't use them for anything else. It's because they get their use. And I've got a little 1/8 cup, a 1 ounce portion scoop that's just going to make it handy when we want to fill those. And also we're just going to have a standard half-size baking pan so we can put these in the oven when it is time to go. I am wearing an apron. Anytime you're working with flour, an apron is going to be your friend. So a short crust in its most basic form is just flour, some sort of fat, whether it's butter, shortening, lard, and water. That's really all you need at its most basic. We're going to add some sugar, some salt, and well, really that's the only other thing we're adding for this one is sugar and salt. I've done it where I've added cheese. I especially like to use aged or hard cheeses because then it doesn't really mess with the moisture content of the dough very much. But just dry herbs, you can really kind of go nuts with it. But for this one, we're just going to go with the basic, very lightly sweet pie crust. If you were going to do a savory pie, same crust, just leave the sugar out. One thing that you want to make sure is that all the ingredients are cold, especially the fat. We're going to actually be rubbing it in with our fingertips. You can use a food processor to do this, a pastry cutter. I find that just using my fingers is a really great way to do it. If I'm doing a lot, I'll use a food processor, but I don't know if you have one of those at home, so we're just going to go ahead. I'll show you how to rub it with your fingers, and it'll work out real well. So I actually have all the ingredients are in the fridge, including the flour. It's not necessary per se, but I just really find it helps keep everything really cold, especially if you're somebody who just naturally has really warm hands. Right now in the kitchen here it's actually 65 degrees, so I mean it's fine for me when I'm working, but if your house is warmer then you just might want to make sure you work a little bit quicker. Maybe even put on a pair of clean dish gloves or something like that, just to insulate your hands from the dough a little bit. And as you're working it, if you start to think that the whatever fat you're using, in this case butter and just a little bit of shortening, if you think that it's just starting to melt a little bit, not a problem. Just stick it in the fridge for 5 minutes or so and it'll firm back up again, and then you can keep working. The last thing you want is to have melted butter in your dough, because then it's just gonna, it's not gonna get that same sort of crumb to it. Because what's going to happen is those little bits of fat, they're just going to kind of be little chunks, and they're going to layer their way throughout the dough, and then that's how you get that flaky crust to it that is, it's going to be strong enough to hold itself together, but it's still just going to give you those layers. So like I said, today we're actually going to be using flour and shortening, or sorry, butter and shortening, you can use this exact same recipe and just do all butter. I like to use just a little bit of shortening. It makes it a little easier to work with. It's just a little more forgiving, and that is always very nice to have. You get the flavor from the butter, which is of course wonderful. That being said, you can use all butter, all shortening. With the shortening, you won't quite get as many layers in it. As it cooks in the water inside the butter will kind of steam. That's one of the things that helps you get that separate and lift. Of course, it also melts and gives you those little crumbly bits. But yeah, so I have everything in the fridge right now. Just to give you a quick rundown of the recipe, we will be having 1 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon of sugar, half a tablespoon of salt. We're going to be using 3 tablespoons of vegetable shortening and 5 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Now for the water is kind of the tricky part. Depending on exactly how hydrated, how humid it is, your flour and the mixture will just want to take on a different amount of water depending. So I always kind of start off with the minimum, and as you're working it, just very gently working it, we'll just sort of gauge how much it needs, because you don't want to get it fully incorporated and then find that you've added too much and you need to keep working it. The more you work the dough, the tougher it's going to be. It'll still taste all right, but we really want that flaky crust to it. In my earlier years, I actually had a lot of problems with my dough not being wet enough, because everybody always says, don't add too much water. True, but you also need to make sure that the dough is fully hydrated. So don't add too much water, but add enough. If it does get a little too wet, if it's sticky, then we can add a little bit more flour. We can fudge it, but don't be afraid to hydrate your dough. That is something that we're going to want to make sure that we do. Alright, so here we have our cold ice water, just cold water. It's been sitting in the fridge. Use mason jar, make sure that it can hold its temperature. If I've got it out for a minute. I've got the butter here. It's already cut up into about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch size chunks. And I've actually got it dusted with just a little bit of the flour that we're actually going to be using here, just to make it easier to mix in, so it's just not going to stick to itself. And the shortening here also, of course, measured out and nice and cold. So just to help keep this stuff cold here, I'm just going to set it off to the side. By all means, as you're doing this, you can just keep it in the fridge, but just so I don't have to do too much running around, I'm just going to do that. So first, I'm just going to take a little bit of flour, and I'm just going to use a fork to kind of get this shortening here into smaller bits. Shortening does have a lower melting temperature, which is why I'm starting off right away with a fork instead of getting my fingers into it immediately. And then we can just take this, put it right into the rest of our flour. And I may be getting a touch ahead of myself because I forgot to add in our salt and our sugar. Have the salt and sugar mixed in before you start doing this, but it's fine, it's fine. And of course I did just realize that I don't have any normal granulated sugar in here. My wife needed some at home, so I brought it there, and that's where it is. But powdered sugar will still work. It'll be fine. And as you can tell, that was some very careful measuring. But we can eyeball just fine. And if you should be substituting powdered sugar for granulated, of course, you just use less because of the smaller grain size. So now we can just put in our butter. Now just working with our fingertips, really what we're doing here is we're just kind of grabbing together some like handfuls, some little fingerfuls of the flour and just sort of smooshing it and rubbing it right into the butter. So what we're going to kind of be looking for here is something that looks, I'd say kind of like little pea-sized bits throughout. And again, you don't want to like get your whole hands in there and like just start mashing it with your hands, because again, the warmth is going to melt the butter, and we want this to stay cold. Alright, now you can see that it's pretty well worked in. It looks almost like a mixture of breadcrumbs and little pea-sized bits, and that is perfect. That's what we want. So, just going to make almost like a little well there. And again, a lot of people will tell you that a pastry cutter is the best way to go for that, but you know, I really just find that that is easier. It gives me exactly what I'm looking for, and a pastry cutter can just be a lot of messing around. So I have here the maximum amount of water that we might want, so I'm just going to put in most of it except for, say, like a tablespoon or two. And then I'm just going to use my hand kind of like a claw here and just sort of mix it up. You can tell how well it is just coming together here. I know I won't need any more water than I just added. That was perfect. And now you can tell, you grab a handful, it's just going to come together into a dough, just like that. So now I don't want to knead it or anything like that. So at this point, what I'm going to do is just kind of form it into a ball. And actually, you know what? See, I'm going to second guess myself here a little, because as I do that, there's still just a little bit that doesn't quite stick. You can see it's just about there. So here I am actually going to risk just overworking the dough a tiny bit. Still going to be good, just to make sure that we do hydrate the dough enough. Now if you're doing this and you say, oh no, he said rehydrate the dough, make sure you hydrate the dough enough, and then you get done and your dough is just sticky. You know, oh, we don't want sticky, so we went just a little too far. That's alright. You just want to get it exactly right. You can add just a little bit more flour if you need. Plastic wrap is the next thing that we need. And you can see here it looks a little craggly, a little crummy. It's not fully together yet, so I don't want to overwork the dough. So what I like to do is wrap it up in plastic, and then once it's there, just push on it. And the force of pushing on it like that is just going to make it all come together, and that's how you get it together without overworking it or anything. Just giving it a push. And then you can see, let's see if the camera will let us see it. You can just see those little bits of butter throughout there, just those little bits. So we are going to put this in the fridge for an hour to relax. Right now it is together, but we need to chill it for an hour to let the gluten build up. If we would just start to roll it out now, it would tear, it would just come apart, and it would be terrible to work with, and you would just hate it right away. But after we let it rest for an hour, then it will build up the gluten, it will build up the elasticity, so instead of cracking around the edges, it'll stretch really nice. I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to get this in the fridge. And I also, a lot of people put it into a ball. I like to put it into a disc. It chills faster, and it just comes out much more even. Alright, this dough has been resting, relaxing in the fridge for an hour, so let's unwrap it from our plastic, and we're going to roll it out. We're going to cut out our circles, we're going to put it into our tartlet tins, and then we are going to loosely cover it in plastic and put it in the freezer, depending on your freezer, for about half an hour. I have a -5-degree walk-in freezer, so I mean, for me, 14-15 minutes, not that precise, but you know, that's plenty to get it good and cold. It doesn't need to be frozen solid at that point. We just want it to be very chilled before we add our pie weights and put it in the oven. So let's get rolling. Alright, let's get our plastic off. Give ourselves a nice floured surface. We don't need big heaps, but we just want a nice even area. Just a little bit more right in the middle where we're going to start. Get a little bit in your hand. Get your rolling pin nice and floured up. I like to do it right over the dough. Put a little layer over the top, and we start rolling. Nice even pressure, back and forth. Usually when I get to about this point, I like to flip it. You can see it's got some flour there, but we've lost a lot of the flour that was right there. So now we can just flip it again. Again, a lot of that initial rolling is taking a lot of the flour off of the middle of our pin. Give it a nice little dusting again, and keep rolling. As far as rolling pins go, I like to have just a straight, this is a 20-inch maple dowel, just a 2-inch dowel. I'm not a big fan of the ones that have the bearings and the handles and you can just push back and forth, only because growing up, the ones that I had available were very old and the bearings were mostly seized up. They would periodically seize up as you're going, and so you're rolling it and it would just suddenly catch and drag and just ruin your dough. And obviously that's bad. We don't want to tear it. And since it is nice and relaxed, we've got a good gluten structure built up. It's stretching for us real nice. We're not getting some nasty tears around the outside. Even just a little bit right here, it's kind of hard to tell, but I can see that where it's starting to come apart just a little bit, it's actually stretching and pulling around the edges rather than just splitting and cracking. Again, because the dough is well hydrated. If it was starting to split and crack, that would be a dead giveaway that it was not fully hydrated. Now at this point, this is a good size and thickness. If you were just going to put this right into a 9-inch 9-inch pie shell, but we're going to go just a little bit thinner, so our tartlets are going to be a little more delicate, still plenty strong to do what we need them to do. But nice and delicate. As far as thickness goes, it's about, oh, say, just under 1/8 of an inch thick. You can always just kind of give it a little push on it a little bit, and if it you can feel a big dimple as you push into it, you know you've got some more to go. But when you push into it and you don't have a lot of give to it, then you know you're good. And when you get to the ends, when you see, like in the middle, you've got full resistance of the dough all the way across. But then if you get to, I can get my backwards camera orientation here. When you get to the end and it's just on this little bit, if you push just as hard as you are here, you're just going to flatten this end out. So you just want to be careful there. It's a little bit of touch and feel as you go, but you'll figure it out. All right. Push on it, and it just a little bit of give to it, and know that we are good. I like that. Alright, so we've got our 4-inch cutter here. It's always the fun part, where to start. And I usually just pick an end, so I like to push and just give it just a little twist. And just go around. And we're shooting for 12 here. Just get them as close together as you can. Alright, let's see where that got us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 12. Now with these scrap pieces here, it's always the question, what do you do with your scraps? One thing you can do that's just fun, quick and easy, is just take them and leave them little scraps like that, and just sprinkle some cinnamon brown sugar on them, bake them off in the oven. You got yourself some cinnamon sugar little crust bits. I usually will put them back together, stick them back in the fridge, and just make something else. I mean, a nice pear apple galette, something like that. When you re-roll it, it will be a little tougher, not quite as flaky, but it will still be real tasty. But by all means, do not throw it away. Then all I'm going to do with this is just going to give it a light knead just so it all sticks back together. I'm just going to put this right back in the fridge so it doesn't get warm or anything, so I can do something with this later. And again, just do what we did before and just form it into a ball. Now we can take our cute little tints here. So this one's got that little booger on it, but hey, that really doesn't matter. So what we want to make sure we do is don't just set it on there and push, because it's going to catch on the edges. You're going to put a hole in it, you're going to stretch it. So we kind of make one of these sort of shapes here and place it in. And what I like to do, instead of folding it like that, which can kind of come undone a little bit unless you glue it with a little bit of water or egg wash, is just kind of push it down around the edges. So just work around nice and easy. And then once it's in there, I like to just gently but firmly push it into the bottom and work your way to the sides so you can get it into those nice little fluted grooves. And then working with two hands, I'll be pushing in here with just a lip there, so there's a little bit of a lip that'll come out there. And then just work your way around and push that in. So the sides, since we've pushed it down instead of folding it, the sides are just going to be just a little bit thicker, which is just fine. I actually prefer it that way. It'll give us a nice structure around there. And there you go. Let's see if I can show you some of the nuance in there. But there's one. If there's too much flour on it, it seems like, you can just give it a little brush off, but if you wind up with a little flour on there, that's really not a big deal. So again, we push it in. We'll get it formed around the sides a little bit there. Push it in a little bit. Once we're pretty much where we want it to be, we can go in. I start at the inside corners, push it around, and then work our way back to the sides. Again, pushing in, so there's just a little lip that comes up, so you're pushing just below, so you're kind of on top there, but just below there. That top edge is going to have the most heat exposure, and so we want to make sure that that is just a little bit thicker, because if it was thinner or even just the same as everything else, and that would be burned by the time everything else was done. And it's just a little finicky, but won't take long before you've got the knack for it. And they're gonna be so pretty. And if for any reason it feels like your fingers are starting to stick to it or anything just a little bit, you got some flour on the table, just boop boop, give yourself a little dab. And assuming I figure out how to fast forward this little bit here, so you don't need to watch me do all of it, this next part here should be sped up for you. And there we go. We have all of our shells filled. Now we can just put them right into our baking pan. This is what they will end up being baked on. But first, let's put this on it so I don't get flour all over it. There's a little booger. Push that down. Alright, we'll cover it in plastic. And then I just like to put a towel on it. And that is plenty sufficient to just keep them from getting dried out. So this is going to go into the freezer for a usual household freezer, about 25 to 30 minutes. They don't need to be frozen solid, but good and firm. And you know, if they are frozen solid, that's fine too. I've done this before where I have just stuck them in the freezer and just left them there for a day until I was ready to bake them, and they were just fine going straight into the freezer. So next time we will be putting in our pie weights. Alright, I have these just out of the freezer. And take a look at one. You see it is still barely pliable, but also very cold and good and firm. So, makes it very quick and easy to just scoop in 1/8 of a cup, 2 tablespoons, 1 ounce at a time. And what we're going to do with this blind bake is we're going to do them at 375 for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to take them out, remove the beans, and then do them for about another 5 to make sure that the bottoms are good. And give this nice even spacing. And in we go. It's worth mentioning that I have a convection oven, so for me, I mean, this is only going to be more like 7 or 8 minutes. You know, temperatures and ovens kind of fluctuate a little bit. It's definitely going to be less if you have a convection oven. So that being said, you know, keep an eye on it. We're really looking for color. So to first take them out, we don't want any browning really. We just want to see the color on these just getting much paler, a lot lighter color. So, you know, depending on your oven, it'll probably be about 10 minutes to be safe for a home oven. But for me, I'm going to be keeping a little bit closer eye on it. And that'll do its thing. I am ready to take them out of the oven. First part of our blind bake. And here they are. So we can see that they are starting to puff up around the edges. They are not browning yet, but they are definitely much lighter in color. They no longer look like raw dough. And all I do is just give it a little tap on my hand, and you can see all those pretty little bean dimples. And so I'm actually wearing 2 pairs of nitrile gloves, and that is enough to protect my hands from the heat. And all I'm doing is I'm kind of cupping it very gently like that, and then just tapping it on my hands to get them out. Some are going to stick, but a little tap, maybe a little flick, and we come right out. I just love all those little bean dimples. If you want to make it easier for them to get out, you can actually cut little parchment paper circles and set those in to the bottom. It helps if you have a little like a little paper tab coming up the side, just so you've got something to grab onto. If they don't want to come out, then you're not sitting there digging. I mean, don't get me wrong, these are warm. Get this last little bit of bean out. There we go. So I'm just knocking these onto a towel because they are going to be a little wet just from the steam, and a tiny bit of the butter that leaches out. I'll actually take this towel and ball it all up around the beans and just give it a vigorous rubbing, and that'll get off all of that excess butter and everything. And now we can just go right back into the oven for these for another 5 minutes. At that point, they'll be nice and golden brown. You'll be able to tell just by looking at them that they are going to be lovely. Alright, they are looking like they are ready to come out of the oven, so let's grab them. Very nice. Alright, I'm just going to put these onto their drying, cooling rack right now. So, they will come out very easily. You can just see that beautiful color. If my autofocus will focus. Focus. No. Oh, I can tell you that the camera is not getting the full beauty of that color. Oh, it's just perfect. Yeah, I'm looking at the color right in front of me here and looking up at my screen, and these definitely are looking a little more pale on the screen. Really wish that color was coming through. I'm sure it's because I'm on a stainless steel table, which is why I've got this colored cloth down to try to take off some of that glare, but there's still a lot of glare from around me reflecting off everything else. But I can tell you guys, these are not as pale as it may be looking on the screen. But these are great. So you can see with our blind bake that except for just like these couple here, they've just got a tiny little bubble there that came up, which is fine because with the blind bake it did stick, it adhered to the bottom. It didn't completely lift up and bubble off there. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I am just going to leave that, and we're going to let these cool for about 45 minutes. And once those have fully cooled for 45 minutes, then you can store them, depending on how long you're going to store them. And for starters, once they're cool, it works really well if you've got a plate that fits into a Ziploc bag really well. Just throw them on a plate, put them in the Ziploc, kind of get out as much air as you can, and then either use them within a couple of days or just put them in the freezer. They will freeze real well. You can use them later, and yeah, they will hold just fine. So I think that's all we've got today. It's been real fun talking at you. I hope I get to see you all soon. If you have any questions about anything that we went over today, don't hesitate to contact me through email or Facebook or whatever is most convenient. I like to be helpful and talk about food, so I'm all too happy to help. So that is today's class. You guys take care.